All right. So everyone be aware we are being recorded, and I'll post this out to YouTube at a later date. But just to get started, like I said, my name is Eric Skaggs. I'm the first item on the list there. I put a 1 next to it because David's got a 2, and I can't be, I might as well throw a 1 on there. Eric Skaggs the first. David Warner the second is the gentleman I work with at Catapult Systems. He was lucky enough to go to the SharePoint Conference North America in May 23rd, something or other. 21st to 23rd. Thank you. Mark.
Right.
Perfect. So David's a managing consultant with Catapult. I'm a senior lead consultant with Catapult. I've been with Catapult for about 4 years now. So David put together this presentation for us, and we've been circulating it internally. And so I wanted to kind of present it to the user group. It seemed fitting. Let's talk about some of the latest announcements. We're going to kind of go through this somewhat quickly. If you have any questions about a particular topic, we can certainly explore those in some more detail. And then what I would really like to get out of this session from you is some good topic ideas for future efforts. And I would like to give you guys the opportunity to come up here and do this. You don't have to be proficient in public speaking. It's nothing to be nervous about. You just come here and tell us what you know, what you don't know, what you'd like to know, and so on. And, just contribute something to the group. And, I certainly don't want to be up here every month doing this. And to be, now that I think about it, next month, July, we'll probably not meet. Yeah, so July 4th is a Wednesday. So we'll probably skip July, unless anybody wants to meet on July 4th. But yeah, let's get started here. And so this again is a kind of summary of the SharePoint Conference North America 2018. David Wen, he put together some detail on some of the things he found most prevalent, most important. Okay, there's a lot of sessions. Not everybody could go to all of them, and not all of them were recorded. The keynote was recorded. You can find that online, but I wasn't able to find much else online, and I asked David about that. He didn't have any more links for me either, so we'll see how things turn out. I think part of that, too, was right after the North American conference. It was the next week or the week after was the European conference, so they didn't want to, flood the internet with a bunch of videos, I guess, of duplicate topics. And there were some announcements that came out at the Europe conference that weren't in North America, and vice versa. So there's just a ton of information floating around right now. And then, we're going to have Ignite later on this year, too, which will probably yield more content and more announcements. But if you've been keeping up with everything, really a lot of what you're seeing about around the SharePoint space is Microsoft's talking a lot about the modern experience. And that's confusing to a lot of people because what that represents is change. So it's intimidating, it's scary, it's confusing, and it's a very significant change. It's not like we went from SharePoint 2010 to 2013. Right, where it was like, oh, there's some UI differences, but the site actions menu moved across the screen. There's quite a bit of different things going on in the modern experience. I'll bring up a modern site versus a classic site and show you that. I think this is a good forum to do that in, and feel free to ask questions as they come up. So the top announcements here, at the top there you see site design and site scripts for hub sites. That right there is a mouthful. You got to know what a hub site is, a site design, a site script. These are all different elements that do different things and mean different things. We can dive into those. At a high level, how many of you have had to deal with multiple site collections in SharePoint? We all do. Mark's rolling his eyes. And I don't blame you for rolling your eyes. But the biggest problem there is everybody wants their own stuff, but they all want to have a shared navigation. They want to feel like they're part of something greater, but it's mine. Don't touch my site, right? That kind of a thing. And that's respectable to a degree. I've always been a proponent of let's open things up a little bit more. Let's be a little bit more relaxed, and let's rely on people to do their jobs and do them effectively, which that is a scary statement to some. I have to rely on people to do their jobs well. That is scary to some people. But you get to a point where, and even myself, I'm moving more and more from writing code every day, doing the code, to more of telling other people what kind of code needs to be written and why it needs to be written that way. And I'm relying on them to follow the guidelines that I'm helping establish. And it messes with your head because you're used to just doing it your way and understanding it. Now you have to put it in a different context to explain to someone else. So I get it to a degree, but the concept of a hub site is this. You take one site collection and you declare it to be the hub for a particular something. It could be HR. Okay. Now the HR environment, let's say HR has 5 site collections unto itself. HR is a department. In Office 365, every site collection can have up to 1 terabyte of storage. So the old school thought process of having multiple site collections and needing that so you can compensate for storage and navigation and security, all that's kind of going away because one site collection now can support a lot more content, a lot more storage. And when we're in the cloud, we don't care about databases or how all the infrastructure is architected. We just use SharePoint for what it is. So, I have a client at work right now that has over 40 some site collections in SharePoint Online, and they keep asking for more. And every time I say, well, why? Like, what's really the justification for this? And a lot of times it's security, and a lot of times the security desire, the reason behind that security concern is personal preference. It makes me feel better if things are separated. Okay. But, going forward, we're going to see that flatten out a bit, I think. We're going to have fewer site collections, easier ways to have navigation across site collections as needed. And I guess I shouldn't say fewer site collections. We're going to see more site collections, but they're going to be more easily maintainable, I think. I'll explain that a little bit more as I get through this. But we would declare one of those site collections in HR to be a hub, and then we would add the other 4 site collections to that hub. So whatever site collection it is that you deem to be the hub is the one that you define the navigation in, and then anything you join to it inherits that navigation and the theme and everything else. So you actually have now in SharePoint up to 3 different levels of navigation. You've got your hub navigation along with the site navigation along with that left-hand current navigation. So it's getting more complex but also more simplistic in a way, because if you want cross-site collection navigation now, you don't have to worry about creating a custom master page or finding a third-party solution that allows you to do that or going through a whole bunch of hoops to make it happen. Microsoft is giving you a way to do that that's relatively simplistic. Bonita?
I'm going from 2010 now to online, migrating with ShareGate. I don't have a choice, so.
Yeah.
I've been just given responsibility to an entire organization, top level site, because there's nobody else now. And they waited until the last minute. I have to have tons of sites migrated by, well, it was July 31st. Now they're giving some of them till December.
Okay.
And I can't make any sub-sites until I do the design standards at this, and it looks like it's a site, so we have the Arizona State main site level. It looks like they created a site collection. And now I have to create and migrate all my other tons of stuff to a sub-site under the site collection. I noticed that when they created it, it created a page, a team site, because there's no more blank sites.
Right.
Right. So I created a team site with a page. Well, in 2010, a page is limiting compared to some of the other, like the master page, etc. Is the page I start with? I'm finding myself blocked in right now with the color schemes.
Yeah.
I need to create specific colors for our design standards. And that's
communication pages as for hub sites for the roots of each of those, and that gives people information. I don't know, you'll get into this, I think, the difference between modern communication and team sites.
Yeah, we'll take a look at the difference.
Yeah. So at the bottom left, I'll be done. At the bottom left, it says turn it into a classic.
Yeah, I go back to classic SharePoint.
I'm not sure if I should do that yet or not, but I'm trying to find out more about that, if I should do that.
Well, if you go to Classic SharePoint, so let me pull up a site. This is azsharepointpros.com. No, .sharepoint.com, because we're in Office 365 and SharePoint Online. So this is a team site. Okay, when you create a site in SharePoint Online, you can create a classic site. You can create a modern site. You can create a classic site and turn modern features on. I mean, you can do all the different permutations of this work that you need to. Now, in here,
What is this? 'Cause this is what we've got.
this is a classic site.
Oh, but it asked me about you want to convert.
Well, it depends on what page you're on. Because if you're on, let's say, let me start by doing this. Let me create a modern site.
Well, I didn't want to break your flow, but I was just.
Well, all right, so let's do this. Let me go through the content in the slides and keep that in mind. Here, we'll do this. Anita, got a question on modern versus classic migrations. All right, so let's do this. I'm going to fly through some of this content. Site designs are how you implement a consistent look and feel and configuration, essentially, of a site. Site scripts are how you enact a site design, to a degree. An example of a site script might be to take a theme and apply a theme to a site. Okay? And that's implemented through a site design. So when you go to create a new site, you can pick a template in the modern examples. So if I'm at the SharePoint homepage here and I go to create a site, I choose either a team site or communication site. These are both modern experience sites. When I choose either one of them, I'm presented with design options. These are your site designs. So the point is, you can create your own design here, ASU, something, right, that's in this list. And so when you go to create a new modern site, you choose your design. And when you choose your design, it creates a site. And then when the site's created, and you click finish or whatever, it goes through and runs all the site scripts. So it creates a normal communication site, applies your design, which contains your scripts, which can do custom things like add lists or libraries or apply a color scheme to have the ASU colors on there and so on. So we'll hopefully see some of that. Now, I do have a presentation of doing that. It's on YouTube from a previous session. If you go out to YouTube and you find AZ SharePoint Pros out here, it's actually our video here with the most views. It's that one that says theme, scripts, and so on.
This is on.
YouTube?
Oh, YouTube.
It's on YouTube, yep. Let's see what do we have here. So Naveen, you have a question. I'm going to come back to that. Don't let me forget. On the far right here, one of the new announcements was a thing called SharePoint Spaces. I don't know if this is a practical thing or not. At some point, somebody's going to use it, I suppose. But SharePoint Spaces is a way to incorporate mixed reality in your SharePoint environment. What this means is, in the example they show, is generally around product development, people working together to build a car. You got people all over the world, and the, I don't know, blueprints for the car stored in SharePoint, and everyone can put on their visor. What is it? The HoloLens. The HoloLens in the different parts of the world, and suddenly they're all in the same room looking at the vehicle, and they can communicate and talk together. It's mixed reality, right? It's not virtual reality because it's not all fake. It's not all surreal. You can take elements. You can still interact with your local elements as well as the virtual elements and communicate and collaborate together that way. Without you're in the same room virtually. It's an interesting thing. If you're interested in SharePoint Spaces, go find the video on it. I can't really get into much more detail because I can't really think of too many things that are practical, but Mark?
I can think of only one, and that would have been employee orientations and facilities.
Ooh, good example. Employee orientations. Welcome to the company. That's a great idea. That's a great idea of a useful way to interact with SharePoint Spaces. Now, I work for Catapult Systems, and I work out of the Phoenix office sometimes. My office is technically in Texas, and when I started with Catapult, after a few months they flew me to Catapult, and we did our boot camp, new employee orientation boot camp, how to be an effective consultant and so on, and went over all the Catapult ways, and got to meet my fellow boot campers, and SharePoint Spaces or some other type of mixed reality thing could have made that a more cost-effective solution instead of flying people to Austin and then having them, hotels and rental cars and all the whole shebang there. Just have them work remotely and connect in that way. That could work too. So, some applications there. At the bottom here we have the SharePoint Starter Kit. This is for demo purposes only. That is very, very important. Demo purposes only. Microsoft is going to say this and say this and say this. Vesa said this a lot at the conference. David told me he said it a lot at the conference. There is some cool stuff in there, but it's for demo purposes only. It's basically a way to take all the stuff that Microsoft's been cooking, modern sites and designs and scripts, and being able to click a button and have a custom environment. It's an example of doing that. You run it and it happens and it works, and it's like, that's cool, but it's not production ready. You wouldn't want to just use it. On the far left, very cool. Any of our newer solutions written with the SharePoint framework, developed with the SharePoint framework, will have the ability to run in Microsoft Teams. Okay? So there was this thing called Skype that Microsoft purchased. All right? Then we have your consumer version, Skype, and then we have the business version, Skype for Business. And as time goes on, what we're seeing is Microsoft is more and more closely merging Skype into Teams, right? We now have an Outlook. Well, let me open up Outlook. So Naveen, for the starter kit, it's not a viable commercial solution yet. That's correct. It's something that you can use, tweak, and build off of for yourself. But it's not, Microsoft's going to say, if you implement this for production, we're not going to support it. I mean, it's a demo. But check this out. If I come out to my calendar and I want to create a new event, okay, and I want to make a meeting around this, what I would typically do is, try this again here, create a Skype meeting. Just to the right of that, we now have a Teams meeting option. I updated Office earlier this week, and that Teams meeting thing popped in there. So you can create a Skype meeting or a Teams meeting, and there's always confusion over what do I use because people click the wrong button now, but we'll get there. We'll figure it out. But that's kind of the point, is we're seeing more and more Microsoft moving towards combining Teams and Skype. And are they going to phase Skype out? I don't know. I can't say, but I guess I wouldn't be too surprised if they did. Teams is out there and is included with Office 365 anyway, but I don't see Skype going away for a long time if it is going to go anywhere, because enterprises have on-premises Skype implementations that are going to need support. All right. So here's a visual for SharePoint Spaces. Mixed reality is initial use cases. Mark mentioned recruiting and onboarding. Learning, product development. I mentioned the product development thing with the car. Some cool stuff there. David's take. Ideal use of innovation is sometimes unknown until released to the masses. So Microsoft created this thing, and it's like, well, it's an option to use, right? But at some point, what's a really cool way to use it? And so now that it's going to be out there and available, someone's going to find a really cool way to use it. And I'm sure at Ignite or one of the next conferences, we'll have a case study of a client who took it to the nth degree and is doing something insane and cool, and that'll be great. The SharePoint framework solutions in Microsoft Teams, you can build a framework. So the SharePoint framework is a developer's toolkit to write solutions that run in SharePoint. I'm doing some of that right now, managing some of that right now. But the point is, we now have support to expose our SharePoint framework solutions in Microsoft Teams. So if you haven't seen Teams, it's funny, I get here and I shut everything down, then I have to open it back up because I want a demo. But while Teams loads, imagine you're in your web browser Firefox or something, not IE. And you have a form to enter data into a SharePoint list, right? Normal SharePoint list, you go new item, you get the form, you fill it out, enter, you're good. Now, if I were, as a developer, I could create a form with the SharePoint framework that you could drop on any page, anywhere. You wouldn't have to go to the list in SharePoint, but I could create a form for you where you could enter your data, submit it, and it gets stored in the SharePoint list. Okay? I can take that same form now, and instead of making you go to somewhere in SharePoint, you can just open up Teams and do it from here. We don't really have an example of a Teams solution in here, but we use this. Teams has a built-in kind of a wiki where you can just type stuff out. I mean, this is the kind of thing you could do with SharePoint. You would build a solution that does something, and you can either expose it in SharePoint as part of a web page or in Teams. And it could be the same thing, same user interface, pointing to the same back-end data storage endpoints or whatever, giving the same experience to different people who are more comfortable working in SharePoint directly versus Teams directly. Okay? So there's some cool things coming there. And of course, Teams being more and more popular and prevalent, we have a lot of things in the world of bots that are going to be coming out. This is a team bot. So ask me a question about Teams, and I'll try to answer it. What connectors are there for Teams? And then the bot's going to answer. Here's what I found. Learn about connectors for different services and so on. And you can integrate, Tailspin toys or whatever into your Teams environment.
Have you tried the Cortana bot?
I have not tried the Cortana bot. Is it? I wrote a bot, a silly little bot, that if you put a string into, it would just reverse it and spit it back out. Just to kind of get familiar with the architecture of a bot in the service, because Catapult wants to start writing bots. We don't know what we're going to write or why yet, so that's part of the problem. But Microsoft's touting bots. Everyone's talking about bots and AI and natural language and doing some cool stuff, and it's like, that's great, but what are you going to do with it? That's what we're working on.
Cortana bot does is it serves as a schedule system. You're saying that in Teams, for example, you want to schedule a meeting, you could tell it to schedule a meeting with these people. And then you go out and then you look at everybody's calendars and find appropriate time periods and make suggestions, and then it will interact with those people on its own to set up the meetings that's appropriate without your involvement.
Oh, that's cool. Cool. So Cortana bot sounds like it's an interesting one to take a look at for scheduling some meetings with folks. Let's see, what do we have out here? I have some stuff out here. Like if I go out to Teams, Fuse is what I manage, and so in Fuse, I added the Visual Studio Teams Services connector in here. So as an example, Teams is for, you think of Teams, you're a group of people doing something together. You can start a conversations down here and have a persistent thread in here as opposed to in email that gets lost. And then people don't continue the email thread, and so you're like, where was the original thing, and where are the attachments and everything? Teams is kind of, the purpose of Teams, a good way to think about it is, Teams is a conversation-centric solution. Okay? SharePoint is a document-centric solution, right? Where do you go in SharePoint to have a conversation? You can do a discussion board, but those are kind of kludgy and clunky and kind of being phased out now. But anyway, you can't really go see a natural conversation in SharePoint somewhere effectively. It's all about documents with SharePoint. Upload your files, organize your sites, your architecture, put your information in there originally for documents. And then so with Teams was originally the Slack competitor, created to be a conversation-centric solution for team collaboration. Let's talk, and then we can upload documents and assets and artifacts that enhance the conversation, but the focal point is that conversation. That's a good way to think about Teams generally. The ability to create a solution of some kind in SharePoint. You can work with that same solution in SharePoint or in Teams. So it's just an integration point that's going to be popular. Site designs and site scripts, I kind of mentioned and touched on what those are. I can do an example of those for you. The SharePoint Starter Kit, demo purposes only. It creates multiple site collections in your environment. So you don't want to do this in your production environment. Okay, you can go out and establish a developer tenant, play with this or whatever. If you do it in your production environment, be aware there's multiple site collections that get created. I imagine you have to be an admin because you're creating site collections with it. And so not for, there's some cool stuff in there, like a footer. There's a stock widget. Their stock widget actually uses the AlphaVantage API, which is very similar to what we're doing at Catapult for our clients, oddly enough. Some cool stuff coming with the SharePoint framework. This is kind of developer focused, but app pages. So instead of creating a SharePoint framework solution that has to be a web part, you can actually do a full page application that does something. Socket.io, what you need to think about there is real-time communication. Okay? A lot of times when you're working on a website, you fill out a form, you hit enter, and you wait. While you're waiting, the data is being sent, and your browser is waiting for a response. So your browser is going to be like, cool, they said they got it, now I'm going to go on to the next thing, right? Socket.io is real-time communication. It's faster than that. Okay, so basically you can have your web page up looking at your data in a list, and you never have to hit F5 and refresh because there's some real-time communication going on there, and your page is just showing the latest. WebSockets is a thing that's been around for a long, long time. It's very technical and complicated, and has not been very popular with people actually implementing it because we haven't needed to. But Socket.io makes it a higher level implementation of WebSockets that's easier to interact with. And so it's becoming more and more popular, and Microsoft is making that a prevalent conversation topic here. Pre-allocate placeholders. So placeholders are interesting. We actually have at Catapult designed a modern header, which I'll show you. The problem is, and this is not our fault, this is just the way Microsoft's got things set up right now. When you load the page, you see Microsoft's header, the page completes its load, and then whoop, it flips, and all of a sudden our header is there and Microsoft's is gone. And that's because it was prior to this pre-allocation placeholder type thing. So Microsoft has their composite header at the top of a modern site. We want to replace that with ours because we want to, and our clients want to. So there's a little bit of a flicker now that should be going away, hopefully, as they implement these placeholders for us and make them available to us. Let's see. There's some updates for the SharePoint mobile app that actually make it quite a bit more useful than it was. A lot of Microsoft folks would tell you straight up that they don't use it. Mark?
With the mobile app, now their recommendation is to, if you're doing anything in JavaScript, you should be using React. React.
Specifically for the mobile app?
Because of Facebook's integration with it, it's much faster. It compiles much faster, so the recommendation is to get any scripting that you're doing is React.
Okay. So Mark's saying any scripting that we're doing with JavaScript, Microsoft's recommending to use React because it compiles faster. And React was sourced from Facebook?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a Facebook framework, essentially. Okay, cool. And it's interesting. I'm going to show you guys, hopefully, if I have some time here, a modern web part that we're developing that part of my decision and team management process, we purposely decided not to use React in some cases, and I'll explain why. And honestly, let me know if that makes sense, because if it doesn't, I want to rethink it. But we kind of talked about, let's see, site designs and scripts. This next item, SharePoint list and library updates. We can now format rows in addition to columns in the UI, in the modern experience. You can copy and paste data from Excel. It'll create new columns automatically now. People use Excel for everything. So being able to let's say you have a SharePoint list with just one column, and you can copy paste from Excel, and it'll just create new columns for you. and like get the data in SharePoint first, and then you can work with it from there. That's kind of handy.
Is that kind of replacing the data sheet?
Say again?
Is that kind of replacing the data sheet view?
Is it replacing the data sheet view? I don't know. I think that might be a feature added to the data sheet view.
So, if you've seen the red light, green light, yellow light things, people put together for different indicators, the formatting on this data. So you can set up, you can script that in. And it basically will show what, look at your lines, highlight them. You don't have to build those custom scripts.
Yeah.
Cool.
So
Into like a code column where you had to kind of put code into a column to get.
You have to set conditions forever. Really cool.
Yeah, we can see what we can find too. I don't know if our tenant is set up for first release, but I don't know if this has gone out to first release yet, given that it was just announced at the conference. But we can see what we can find. It's possible. And then real-time updates. It says here if someone else is editing the list you are viewing and changing data, you'll see it updated automatically. That's pretty cool. And then there's going to be a SharePoint 2019 for on-prem. So SharePoint Server 2019 coming to a server closet near you. Can you do? Well, that's the thing. There's no direct update path. So you're going to have to go from 10 to 13 to 16 to 19, or 13, 16, 19, or 16 to 19. So. Well, yeah, but you're using a migration tool, so you're not taking infrastructure and upgrading infrastructure, right? You're taking the content in the databases and copying it over, which is fine. Shit, hopefully it's fine. ShareGate's a pretty decent tool. The beta? The beta is sometime this year. That's. The RTM is usually in the fall. I don't know if it's coming out earlier, but yeah, I mean, yeah, and it could be any time. And one interesting thing, SharePoint 2019 will support a lot of what's in SharePoint Online. So, if you're at a point where you're like, well, what do I go with? And you really have to have on-prem, I'd wait till 2019 because like SharePoint 2013 does not support anything that was built with the SharePoint framework. It doesn't support any of the modern experience stuff.
I can't believe that they wouldn't give you an option from 16 to 9. I mean, what is that? That's
I don't think that's true. I think there's an upgrade from, well, this is David's deck. I think there's got to be an upgrade path from 16 to 19, but there's aside, because that's just previous product to next product.
right.
Microsoft has always supported that from what I know, but they're saying there's no path from 13 to 19. You have to go 13 to 16, then to 19.
No, but are you telling it where it's going now specifically? You don't have to create the area that it's going into? I've heard people have success in it.
Yeah, we'll create a site.
Maybe we just did it wrong. I don't know, but it created an individual site within our overall site. So then we have to move all the files.
Yeah, I've got some basic experience with ShareGate. I haven't done a whole lot with it, but you kind of get this, the version I used at the time kind of had a split screen of old environment, new environment. You would check the stuff that you want to move from the old and, you log into both environments and you'd be able to say what you want to move from the old to the new, and it would create sites and things for you based on that structure. So it should, for the most part, retain that. But I know we had some issues with like lookup columns and workflows are always an issue.
Workflows, yeah. But I heard that it moved over InfoPath. Some people say InfoPath, but InfoPath forms going over pretty good.
I think I didn't have anything to do with that part. I think we wanted to just put that on our high
Okay.
Quick question Navina had here was for site theming. Does the color palette tool still work with the modern experience? I hate working on TypeScript to theme every modern site. So Naveen, if you can, post me a link to what color palette tool you're talking about, because there's a new color palette tool you're supposed to be working with new modern experience, and we can try to put together something that looks not horrible in a little bit. Special note. You trying to get in?
Yeah, that's right.
Come on in. Here for the SharePoint? Yeah. Have a seat. It's over here. It's the main door's over there. It's closed right now, I believe. Oh, okay. So, sure. Special note. This is of particular importance for us. I manage something called Fuse at Catapult Systems. It's an intranet as a service where we help our clients create intranets that are effective and useful for themselves, for their organizations, for their partners and clients, and so on. Excuse me. And we have a lot of customers who are larger customers moving to SharePoint Online. One of the biggest complaints we get is, this is slow. I mean, when you look at a SharePoint Online environment, not customized, native, and out of the box, compared to an on-premises implementation, native and out of the box, same settings and configuration for a site, on-premises is quite a bit faster. You know, it's local servers, network latency is low. You're connected to a server that's 100 feet from you or 300 feet from you, as opposed to going somewhere across the state, wherever it may be in a data center, right? So on-premises is quite a bit faster natively. So a lot of clients are struggling with the adaptation of moving to SharePoint Online being quite a bit slower, perceptually. You know, their perception is it's slower because it is, because of science when it comes down to it. One of the things we've noticed as we built Fuse, we built it on top of the publishing infrastructure. Okay, we're now moving away from that. We've been moving away from that for a while because publishing adds additional overhead that's no longer even present in the modern experiences now, so we're having to shift and adapt to that. But Microsoft made a point of saying, yeah, at least 30% overhead is added. So if you're complaining about performance, you turn on publishing, performance is going to seem, or actually be, 30% worse. Shame on Microsoft. So they're telling you, don't use publishing unless you have to or whatever.
See, that's what I was mainly turning on because I need to saw all the custom workflows and all the I had to have publishing.
Publishing helps for a variety of things, workflows being one of those, if you use those native workflows. If you don't use those native workflows, there's not a whole lot of benefit of turning publishing on. If you're not doing a whole lot with, managing navigation, and it adds up quite a bit of stuff.
What about the custom workflows?
I mean, you can still do custom workflows without publishing. What I tell people now is my own best practice when it comes to SharePoint is only change something when you need to, right? If you're worried about what this feature does and you want to find, you play with it and figure it out, cool. Play with it and figure it out and turn it back off unless you need it on. Learn, but don't just leave things on. The biggest problem I run into with any environment is people don't clean up after themselves. Because everyone's scrambling to learn, because we're all thrown into this job doing SharePoint stuff that we had no intention of getting involved with. And every time I say that, people are smiling at me because they know it's true. That's how I started in it. But publishing adds overhead. Be aware of that. Okay. The modern experiences don't have publishing involved. So if you're starting fresh with anything SharePoint, start with a modern site. Keep it simple. I say use it for what it is. If you really need to do something because it adds significant business value, then go ahead and do it. Structural navigation, this is a common issue we have with Fuse clients. When I run the code that deploys Fuse to your site collection, we do not customize the navigation. We leave it set to its default setting of structural navigation. That's the SharePoint default setting. So it's based on your site architecture. So if you have 300 webs in a site collection, Every time you load every single page, SharePoint is iterating through those to build your navigation. And we had issues when clients got upwards of 30 sites in a site collection. And everything, I believe it was something like, I could be wrong on what I'm remembering, but I believe it was along the lines of 8 calls. Every one web in your site to build the navigation, your client machine had to talk to the data center across the state, across the region, wherever it is, 8 times for every site. So if you have 5 sites, that's 40 calls. 30 sites, that's 400 calls, or 240 calls, or whatever that comes out to in mathematics.
That includes a sub of a sub?
A sub of a sub, and it gets worse. The more you have, the more calls that is, the bigger the performance impact. And so Microsoft at the SharePoint conference North America is telling people, not just be careful about using structural navigation, they're saying change it, don't use it. The other options are you can use managed navigation, which is where you use the term store in the admin center to define keywords and terms and build out a navigation. And then you can just set your sites to use that navigation structure. And then that way it doesn't have to go see what all the sites are every time you load every page. It just pulls from the thing that it already knows about. Another option, which would require custom development, would be a search-based navigation. Or now in SharePoint Online, they have the concept of hub sites in these modern experiences, which is, without a doubt, the most preferred way to go.
Have they got any determination if it's slower with the AI that they're using now that seems on those websites?
Is it slower with the AI they're using behind the scenes?
They're promoting, basically, they're learning from those websites. It learns as a user what you want to view, where you're going, what you belong to, and it promotes items for you to view.
I see. So it's like recommended sites to follow and things like that.
Things like that.
I really don't know if that has any kind of a performance impact or anything like that. I think it's hard to say because all that stuff's going on behind the scenes. So it's not directly affecting your experience as a user.
I just wonder if it's affecting like the load times because it's per user.
It probably is affecting the load times to some degree because it is getting content that it's got to render. But if they're using like Socket.io or something to get that rapid real-time response, maybe not. I don't know. And Microsoft there's a fun saying in consulting of you got to sell it so you can build it. So Microsoft is selling it right now, and it may have a performance impact that they'll improve later. I don't know. It's all speculation at this point. Did you have something, Benina?
There's probably articles out there on the difference between structural navigation and then managed navigation.
A lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
To describe exactly what I should do.
Remind me, and I'll show you. Honestly, remind me, and here. Let's do this. I will do a quick rundown of structural.
We're a site collection offshoot of the main ASU.
So you may still be able to manage your own navigation.
Because you probably still pop on the site collection.
No, site collection.
Yeah.
Totally careful. This is
Well, yeah, I mean,
And then also, do you have admin rights to the site collection? Okay.
So Naveen has an interesting question. Does the minimum download strategy feature being disabled have any effect on modern sites? I would say no. The reason, I'm kind of going off of what I know. So let me explain my thought process here. Bless you. The minimum download strategy feature was something that was only effective in publishing sites. Okay. Modern experience sites don't use publishing, so that that minimal download strategy feature should be irrelevant. So that's my answer to that one. It has no effect on modern lists and libraries. Navigation to site contents will not be affected on modern. Navigation to site contents will not be affected on modern. I don't believe so. I think you're right on that, Naveen. Oh, let's see here. There's some roadmap stuff here coming out from the SharePoint conference. Let's just kind of take a quick look at these. You can see the Q2, Q3, and then later on in the year. SharePoint lists in Microsoft Teams. Forms file upload, a migration tool for list support. Now this is all subject to, what version of SharePoint are we working with as the source and the destination. There's always gotchas to all this stuff. Power Apps auditing. Let's see, is there anything in here that's of particular interest? So some integrations with Microsoft Flow, some integrations with Power Apps, Power BI. A lot of stuff about Flow and Power Apps and Power BI. So you can see here, even when they're talking about this middle column, automate, using Microsoft Flow for page approvals. So when you turn on the publishing feature in SharePoint, one of the workflows you got was the page approval workflow, right? You could build it on your own and make your own thing work with that, but you get features that are part of the publishing infrastructure are a lot of columns, a lot of site content types. You had features like content approval, versioning was automatically enabled in the Pages library, and so on. The Pages library was created for you. A lot of stuff happens when you turn on publishing, and so, but there's also all that overhead alongside it. So now it's more of take a team site, do what you can with that. Use Flow for workflow, use Power Apps for your forms, and you should be able to get to where you want to be for the most part. It's hard to say that because so many companies do so many different things with SharePoint, but some cool things coming.
So for instance, I use the workflow. I have any vendors come in. Right now I'm using OpenID for outside vendors to come in.
Sure.
On a big site where they put their stuff in. Then we have all kinds of workflow saved in there that when they approve the back end, the ASU approves their proposal, goes through, it sends them out email. Mm-hmm. Or if you have an issue, you write real quick in the notes, you didn't fill in this form, sends it to them, they come back and they update it, we get an email into an inbox. And then once that's approved, we send it over to another list that has separate types of permissions for another group to review and do pivot tables on.
Sure.
Am I able to do all that in modern sites? Because there was a particular feature that I had to turn on in the back end to get it to go over to another. So I had to do permissions in 2 areas for the vendors in order for that list item, that whole row, to flip over to another list.
I mean, it's one of those.
I can't remember the name of the feature. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say if you can do exactly that with the modern stuff only without knowing really the ins and outs of what it is you're doing. At a high level, it sounds possible, but I don't know, without really sitting down and doing it, if it's possible yet. Because a lot of this stuff is brand new. No one's had a chance to even work with it yet.
And see, publishing I could do without it. It's just because it was publishing a site after I made changes to it, and now I'm just publishing it. But
yeah.
To get all those features, we're able to do. That's the.
So let's shift gears, okay? That's a good question, and the short answer is I don't know, possibly. But shifting gears, let's take a moment since it came up and talk about structured navigation versus managed navigation. I'm going to come back to that, Naveen. So structured navigation is exactly what it sounds like. It's navigation based on the structure of your site collection. Okay? So here's where I do my whiteboard fun stuff. I have this circle, and I'm going to say this circle represents my site collection, or as we call it in SharePoint, a site. Right? There's that terminology confusion we're all mostly familiar with. Every site includes a top-level web. Okay, that's your starting point. Okay? The individual sites in a site collection are called webs. So you start off with that top-level web. And inside every web, we have, whether we want it or not, a home page, a .aspx file, so when we navigate to that web, we see something. Right? Now, we can build a site architecture here, and it's hierarchical, so we can have subsites under our top-level site. This would be your level 2, right? And forgive the crudeness of this. It's not too bad, but it could always be better. So you have, that's your second level. Those are sub-webs under your top-level web. And webs can contain webs, can contain webs, can contain webs. On and on we go, recursively. Building. So instead of a tree with a one root that comes up with a bunch of branches, the root's at the top. It's that upside down tree. There you go. It's an org chart. Love it. It's a site. There you go. So now, what this means is your navigation is based on how you structure your sites. So SharePoint became popular when Microsoft started giving it away. Right? If you bought SharePoint Server or you bought Windows Server 2003, they snuck in this free thing called WSS. So IT would find the exe and run it and install something, and suddenly there's a SharePoint website, and it's, oh, that's interesting, let's use it. And what was an accident now becomes a production environment, and that's why we all have jobs. Okay? But the problem with this approach is it's a valid approach, but what does it require? It requires planning and thought and communication. Before you just arbitrarily create a bunch of sites, you got to think about it, because this is what drives your navigation. And it's never going to work. I've never seen it work. People can plan and plan and plan, and it's okay for a day or two, but then we have a new site that we want to create, and we don't know where to put that. There's no node for that tier, right? So it becomes somewhat cumbersome. And like I said in SharePoint Online, as it's building your site architecture, it's 8 calls back and forth to the server from the client. And that could be for a variety of reasons. That's just what Microsoft has told me. And that was through a support ticket that I had to deal with. But that's what this means. So now watch this. I have a team site here. If I look at site contents in this other tab, now I'm on a modern experience for this page in this site. I can click subsites. My site doesn't have any subsites currently. So let's create one. We'll create a new subsite. Let's call this Human Resources, HR. And notice when you create a subsite, you don't have a modern option. It's always Team Site Classic Experience. That's for now.
Wait, so there's other tabs that you're saying for the classic.
Yeah.
Okay.
When you create a site, a subsite under an existing site, whether it's modern or classic or whatever, you don't get modern. So Microsoft, if you want a modern site, you create a new site collection from the SharePoint home in Office 365.
So you only get it at the top level.
You get it at the top level. Now, I can use PowerShell to script creating subsites that are modern sites. So there's a way to do it. It's just not in the UI yet. So it's, it's... It's all client-side, so all you need is an account that can log into SharePoint and perform the activities your PowerShell scripts will, and you can run that code. You can run those scripts. So if you are a designer, what's that? Are we talking about SharePoint Online or on premises or online? Yeah. So for online, you just need to have, I'm a Office 365 global admin, and I can do everything. So I can run the PowerShell scripts to do everything. But let's say I was just a SharePoint admin. That would allow me to create new site collections and everything below that. So really what you can do with PowerShell is it matches you whatever your role is based on those permissions.
If we, that's, if we are just an admin for the, a site collection, and they won't give us above that, can I still do PowerShell?
So question is, if I'm a site collection admin and I cannot get tenant permission for SharePoint admin or global admin, can I still run PowerShell? And the answer is yes. You can run PowerShell up to and including the rights that you have in your account. So as a site collection admin, you can create new sites, pages, lists, libraries, manage permissions, and all that good stuff. You can do all that with PowerShell as well. So, you know, it's still done as you, it's just scripted. So let's get this created. So I'm creating a subsite. I'm trying to illustrate the structured navigation. So we'll create this subsite. And I am in SharePoint Online. And I've had issues with clients who have 20 subsites, 30 subsites, 40 subsites. It came down to switching them from structured navigation to managed navigation. Now, how involved? It's easy. It's very easy. It takes a little bit of planning and communication, like I said, but it's really easy to do. So now, what I want to draw your attention to here is my global navigation says home and now human resources, right? So my navigation is building out to match the structure. So let's quickly, in the same as a peer of human resources, we're going to add a new subsite for IT. Do IT, classic team site, create. Standard team site, nothing fancy here. Switch back over to my parent site. Okay, so now we have on our global navigation, home, human resources, and IT. Okay, let's go to the IT site and create a site under IT, a child of IT. So now we're getting into that third level down, right? Home. Yeah. Let's see, IT has a project for, I don't know, SharePoint. SharePoint project SP. Do the same thing. Come on. Create. Oh, we'll come back to that again, Naveen. Okay, so now I've created a site called SharePoint underneath IT. I'm going to go to the IT site. And in this IT site, I'm going to look at the navigation settings. Here, top link bar. Okay, it's inheriting links. So this is where you would typically see the publishing aspect of things take effect, because every web can have its own navigation settings to show child sites or not and so on. In this case, because we haven't turned publishing on, all we're seeing is that first tier. Okay, but if I had publishing turned on, yes. Let me just take you out to my intranet at work. This will illustrate the example as well. This is all totally custom navigation that we've built for ourselves, but it'll illustrate the idea. Imagine each of these blue tabs is the subsite of the current site, and then when you hover over corporate services and you see all those links, those are subsites under the corporate services site. And it can go on and on and on and on. So you can be very deep with your site architecture, and the navigation will represent that. You can. It's part of, this is Fuse. You're looking at Fuse. This is what I do all day. Right.
Well, there's features too.
So there's your enabling the quick launch or enabling the tree view.
I think we're going to just set up the site where you turn off whether it's in top level and side or in features.
The issue here is that since this is not a publishing site, we don't see the navigation link she's referring to. Because you should be able to go in and show or hide sites or show or hide pages. But that's only available in publishing. Like if I come out here to Catapult, our intranet, and we look at site settings here, this has publishing enabled. And so you have the navigation link. If you see this navigation link, yes, publishing has been enabled. And see, this is where you can actually, in your navigation, for your global navigation, you can use the structural, which Microsoft says, don't ever use it in SharePoint Online. They finally came out and said it.
Wait, so that's having that navigation on in publishing, that's what you're not supposed to use?
The message here is never use structural navigation. And Microsoft's message is don't use it. So here with Catapult, we're using what we call managed navigation. And the way that you set this up is you go to the term store. Okay. So let me switch back to the AZ SharePoint Pros site collection here so I don't screw up my works environment. Within here, if I go into site settings, let's see, this page is somewhat confusing. So I just search on here for term store. And there's a link down here that says term store management. Okay. So if I go to term store management, there is a specific permission around managing the term store. So you need to have that. However, if you're a site collection admin, I believe you have it. I've run into cases where you don't. Just be aware there's a setting for that. So now in here, it looks like I am not a term store admin here. So now you guys have to help me figure out where that is. Am I a site collection admin? So I am a site collection admin of this site collection. So I'm in the Office 365 SharePoint admin portal. I'll go to the term store here. And let's take a look at permissions because things typically are inherited and trickle down. Okay, term store administrators. So there's nobody in here, so let's put me in here. Seems counterintuitive that you can add yourself, but you can. So again, I'm in the SharePoint Online admin portal in Office 365 under that term store link, and I'm adding myself as a term store admin. That way I can manage the term store. And the term store is what it sounds like. It's a storage location for terms. Terms being words and phrases. So now let's come over here to this term store management tool inside my site. And this is kind of an important point. There's a term store for the entire tenant that you need to be a SharePoint Online admin to manage. And then each site collection can have its own separate term store as well. So you can do things at the site collection level that don't affect the entire tenant. Okay? You don't have the option to choose manage? Say what?
I was going to ask if we're set to structural navigation at the highest level, and you can step navigation at the other levels.
Well, so manage navigation, the navigation setting is generally at the top level site in the site collection. So if you're going to turn manage navigation on, you're going to do it at the top level. You're not going to do it for each individual sub-site.
It can be done, not at the, what do you call the very top site we can't get to?
The admin portal?
Yeah, I mean, because we're a site collection, we're
Yeah.
allowed to have, we can turn that on. If it was, let's say they said it at the very top, ASU site, that we can't touch,
Right.
and they have managed, or structural navigation, can we then change it to manage at this site collection?
For your site collection, you can't
We can't,
at the top level site.
okay.
So let's look into this some more. So now you're talking SharePoint on premises. Tell you what, I can tell you what access you have if I can look in your environment. So let's go through the topic of the general theory of what this is, and then we can look at it. Okay. So inside my team site now I'm at a point where I want to change from structural navigation to managed navigation. Okay. So I would do that by going into site settings. And if I come into here, I don't really have what I need. I have navigation elements, which allows me to turn on the quick launch or the tree view, but it doesn't really have everything else that I would need. So what I need to do at this point is turn on publishing, which seems counterintuitive. But the reason this is being brought up is because a lot of clients already use the publishing features and have implemented the navigation that publishing provides. So it ends up being pretty... there's a lot of overhead because publishing adds a 30% performance hit, and then you have the structural navigation hit on top of that. And so switching over to managed navigation is the way to do it. So I'm going to show you this in the Catapult environment here without changing anything. But you would go into your site settings, publishing's on. I'm not going to turn publishing on in the AZ SharePoint Pros tenant because it takes 5 minutes and we'd sit here and wait for it. I'm going to go into navigation under look and feel. And then this is where I would flip the switch to say, I don't want structural, right? I do want managed. Just choose managed navigation. And when you do that, this page updates. You can scroll down, and there's a link to the term set for that managed navigation. If it's your first time doing it, you would create a new term set, and there's a link down here to open the term store management tool. Okay. So I'll go into that. The term store management tool is your user interface to manage this, to create, edit, delete these terms that build your navigation. It's very odd and weird and kind of confusing at first when you do it for the first time, but you essentially come out here and create a term set. Where did they do it? Right here. Okay. So this is the managed metadata environment, right? We have the term set. We have the term store. Inside the term store, we have term groups. And inside those term groups, we have term sets. And inside those term sets, we have terms. Hooray for definitions. So in this case, we have the Catapult Systems term group. And we have a term set called business units, a term set called compliance type, and so on down the list. Inside each of these term sets are the individual terms that are the navigation. So Austin, consulting, shared services, and so on. So this term set, as you see it here, basically somebody came in here and manually typed these out in this order and rearranged them the way they wanted them. Excuse me. And then our site navigation settings, we said, hey, we want this site to use that Catapult Systems term group and its structure. And so now, once that's all set up and you've gone through and built that out, when you actually come out here and look at the navigation, it's actually built off of that. Business units, consulting, shared services, you got the various things in here.
What
What happens to your structured navigation when you change from structured to managed? Nothing. Because your site structure does not change. Right? So structured navigation works by every time you load the page, F5, SharePoint. I mean, a million things happen when you load a SharePoint page, right? It's not only is it getting the content, but it's also saying, well, who are you and what do you have access to? Should I show you the site settings link or not? It does security trimming, right? It also then looks at your site architecture and your structure, and it has to go through and do the 8 calls per web to build that. And then, before it shows it to you, it has to say, well, okay, here's your architecture. I see that and I've got that, but what do you have access to? So what should I show you and what should I not show you, right? So SharePoint is doing all these things as it's loading the page. So the less it has to think about, the better, right? Managed navigation is not security trimmed. That's an important point. Meaning, I'm Eric Skaggs at Catapult Systems. We have this site out here called Dream Machine. If I don't have access to that, I will still see the link. And when I click on it, I'll get that message that says, you need access to this site. And then I might be confused. But that's an important point. Managed navigation natively is not security trimmed. Microsoft has told me there's a way to do that. And it's not practical. But I believe that the way to do that is every single one of these links in your navigation has to link to home.aspx in the destination site. Actually has to be a file called home.aspx in the destination site. So let's say Dream Machine was one of our custom apps that we have, and home.aspx doesn't exist in the Dream Machine's application because it's not a SharePoint thing, right? Well, too bad. This will never be security trimmed. It's impossible. That's where you have developers coming in writing custom navs for folks. And then this is where like hub sites will be very effective because it has cross-site collection navigation that I believe is security trimmed. I guess I haven't looked that far into it. Do you know, Mark, offhand? Don't know offhand, but
So you're saying the structural navigation was security?
structural navigation is security trimmed.
Managed is not.
Right.
But, yeah, I mean, in the navigation itself, but the access to the site. There, it's taking it, instead of hiding that particular
Oh,
access.
yeah, so right now I can right click and I can say who sees this link and who doesn't. I can hide it. Can't do that with the managed.
Correct. Yep. Managed navigation is.
It's more than see. How to be, how to know.
Yep. So one of the important things here is it comes down to communication to your users. You know, you're going to click a link and it might say you need access to this site or you don't have access to this site, and it gives them a handy form where they can request it. So you may end up in a case where people are requesting access to things they should not have access to. So you then have to deny access and explain that, and that takes up more of your time. Or you kind of handle that up front and say, hey, just so everyone knows, if you click on something you don't have access to, that's the way it should be. If you disagree with that, contact me and we can change your permissions or whatever, right? It's a kind of a catch-22 because structural navigation is great. It's built off how you build out your site, and it is security trimmed, so it makes sense intuitively, and that's why it's the default setting in SharePoint. But moving to SharePoint Online and this performance hit that we have with all these calls from client to server now, it's not practical to use structural navigation. Managed navigation is a bit more flexible and easier to manage because if you want to add a link, you don't have to go create a site in the right place so it shows in your navigation. You just add text in the right place. You know.
What managed navigation, okay, right now in the one site I was talking about that has all the vendors coming in, I have it set permission-wise so they can only see their own line items.
Right.
Would that prevent them from seeing, would I still be able to close that off, managed, if I wanted to give a separate permission to each line item that comes in?
So you're talking about permissions of list items,
Yeah.
items within a list. So that's not navigation at all.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a different topic.
That's still there. Hopefully.
I don't know.
Let's say if you have internal facing, you've got public facing sites, this navigation works really well, goes to a central page for that site, for that group, department, whatever it might be. And everything underneath that can be hidden from the group by structural navigation, as opposed to, yeah, your top level is still managing navigation.
Naveen makes a good point. He says, Naveen makes a good point. There's a lot of confusion over permissions of things inside the term store, because you can be a term store admin, or if I'm a term store admin, but Benita, I want to give you access to manage just a group in there, I can give you access of just the group. So you can have, like, even the term store itself as its own entity has different levels of permissions as well. So yeah, the term store admin can do everything. And it's all about delegation of responsibility, so that I can give individuals in the organization the ability to manage pieces of the term store without giving them rights over the whole thing, because we all own our own parts of the organization, right? So that's kind of what it's for. But does the concept of structured versus managed navigation make sense? I mean, so again, think of it as structural navigation. The navigation is based on the structure of your site. Has to generate that every time the page is loaded, correct. Now, I'm sure that's cached to some degree, and if you're in an on-premises environment where you got your local servers and caching's enabled, that's great. You're caching it up, cool. When you're working in the cloud, there's no guarantee that every HTTP request you make is going to the same server. Why are we going to the cloud, right? There are benefits there for it.
Not at 30% slower.
Well, we're in a major like cloud shift still. You know, I think it's going to be going on for the next decade still. There's a lot of stuff coming, but so if you're not term store admin and still term group manager or term group contributor, you still can't manage terms. You should be able to inside those term groups, but we can come back to that as well. I want to be aware of time. It's about 7:30, so we've got to be out of here by 8. Okay. What other important things do we want to talk about? Say that again? Well, Naveen had a question about the term store permissions. If you're not a term store admin, but you're a term store group manager or a term group contributor, you still cannot manage terms. And so to even prove that out, I'd have to log in and out as different users. I'm not going to have time to do that right now. But what you should be able to do, if you're a term group manager, if I'm remembering correctly, you should be able to manage the terms and term sets inside that group. And then if you're a term set manager, you're scoped to the sub-level of just the term set. So you should be able to create new terms and so on. But if you're, the term store is weird because you can create a term like human resources is my term, and it's created in one place, but then you can reuse it in others. But the source is still the source. So you can run into all these confusing things with the term store. And I'll say that probably the most important thing with it is planning and knowledge management. It's a big part of it. Getting together as a group and determining, hey, what do we want to call this? How do we want to structure it? Why do we want to do it that way? What's your opinion? Why do you feel that way? Oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Let's do that too. You know, these are interactive multi-user sessions where you're trying to talk about what your intranet's navigation should look like. Do you have a comment? Question?
I just wonder how, no, sorry, I can't.
No, that's fine. Totally fine. What I do want to show real quick is the approach of creating a modern site versus a classic site. Okay, so going and I'm in SharePoint Online. Okay, so in the SharePoint Online Admin Center at the upper left here, I have a link to all my site collections. So if I wanted to create a new site collection, the classic way, the normal way, I'm waiting for this to load. It takes a minute to load. There is this new modern SharePoint Admin Center coming too. It's in preview right now. It's much faster. But if I want to create a new site, I would use the ribbon. I'd say new private site collection, give it a name, select a URL, choose a site template. Okay, so call this team site 1, TSO1. Select a template. Okay. Personally, for me, I always start with a team site. You can turn a team site into anything. You got blog, developer, project, community. You can turn a team site into all those things. Pick the best starting point for sure. But I always do publishing. I could do enterprise and look at all these site templates, or there's the publishing options, publishing portal, enterprise wiki. But just to demonstrate the purpose of what we're trying to show off is how to create a site in the classic way.
Real quick, Simon, the project site. That's similar to the separate kind of project that they have at Microsoft has. Does it give you a lot of project features?
So the project site template, the question is, what is the project site template? It's got its own project-centric kind of tools and controls and web parts, and it doesn't have direct integration with Microsoft Project, kind of, not really. It's all about the version of Office that you have. Do you have the right version of Microsoft Project installed in your machine? Generally speaking, it's a team site template that's available for people who don't have Project, the application Microsoft Project, to assist them with managing a project. It is. It's the same as the 2010 one. Maybe some minor things, but it's pretty similar to that. So I'll click OK. This is going to run and create the site collection, and life is good. Now the modern way to do it, or the way that we're going to do it from now on, let's start off portal.office.com. This is kind of your starting point for Microsoft Office these days in the cloud. You go to portal.office.com, you get the form, you log in, then you land on this kind of a page, and here's all your applications that you have access to in the cloud that you're licensed for, and so on. What you see is going to be different from what I see, is different from what anyone else sees. It's all based on your user account, what you have access to, and what you're licensed to do. So now, we're talking about SharePoint, so I'm going to click on the SharePoint icon here, which takes me to the SharePoint home. This is not the SharePoint admin portal. This is the SharePoint home. Okay? And it's from this SharePoint home where you would click the link at the top to create a site. And it's from here where you would choose a team site or a communication site. So let's do a communication site. We will do the showcase. It's kind of the fanciest looking one. So we'll call this showcase 01. And it tells you, yes, that URL is available. It auto-generates the URL based on the name of the site. Okay. Put in a site description, whatever, click finish. Creates the site for you. Takes you right to the home page of the site. This is a new site collection with a top-level web with a home page. And that's what it looks like natively. Some sample content on there. From here you can take it and do whatever you like. It is responsive and works well in a narrow, sorry about my face there, in a narrow viewport. Things kind of condense down and adjust accordingly. You can pull this up on your phone right now and it'll look decent. Okay, it's usable as is. Okay, and this is what the modern experience looks like. It's not. It's more fluid. That's kind of the main goal. So now I could take this modern site and I could turn off the features that make it have the modern page experience and the modern list experience if I wanted to. But you're not going to really do that. You're more likely to start with a classic site and turn modern features on to transition to the modern stuff than you would be to go the opposite way. PowerShell. You would turn the features on with PowerShell. Okay. Yeah, let's stop the recording here. I'm going to